Dear all, welcome to the Financing Brazil Sustainable Agriculture through Green Bond session. Please be mindful that this session will be conducted entirely in Portuguese. To hear the English translation, please choose the English channel. To follow the discussion in Portuguese, please choose the Portuguese channel. Gostaríamos de começar o painel do nosso terceiro dia aqui agradecendo aos nossos patrocinadores, o JP Morgan, Credit Suisse, Ping An, Moody ESG Solutions, Luxembourg Green Exchange, Citi, Refinitiv, BNP Paribas.
Okay, so we'd like to start our panel here in the third day.
Market, Allianz Bernstein, FSD Africa, o Banco Interamericano de Desenvolvimento, o
Thanking the sponsors that you can see up on the screen. The conference would not be possible without your sponsorship. So before we start our panel, we have some housekeeping. So to ask questions, please use the Q&A box in the swap card. Some other comments and questions can also be made over the chat box. We have live interpretation available in Portuguese, Spanish, and Chinese and French. All you need to look for is a little headphone icon. All sessions, they're being recorded and you can watch the sessions into November. Use the tools available on the swap card network, and also in relation to the request, you can visit the virtual booth to talk to us. I'd like to introduce you to our panel members today. We have in attendance the Brazilian Minister of Agriculture, Livestock and Supply, Madam Teresa Cristina, Mr. Milton Menten from Ecoagro, and Paulo Herrmann from Deere. So I'd like to thank you all for being here with us to discuss such an important topic. So before we start our panel, just to provide an introduction to the theme. So this is 8:30 Brazil official time. We're starting our third panel to talk about sustainable agriculture in Brazil. And just to put everything in context, we have been seeing an expressive increase in issuing of green bonds in Brazil. We have reached an accumulated value to 10 billion in Brazil. So the use of land is the second category that has captured about 27% of the total. And this is very important for the country as well as for us to reach our carbon reduction targets. And in the report written by CBI in June 2020 said that we had a potential of $163 billion as potential up until 2030. And we know that this can actually be higher as far as agriculture and financing is concerned. We also have a very important framework for sustainable agriculture in Brazil, also the developing of public policies that has provided support to producers, to farmers, particularly in the integration crop, livestock, forest. And then we'd like to start a round of questions. So, Madam Minister, in 2021, we had the launch of the harvest plan that is now greener with the strengthening of the ABC plan. And we had the double amount of resources allocated in comparison to the previous cycle. We also had and then we also had Fiagro being launched, which is a very important tool to attract foreign capital for agribusiness. So what would be the benefits that such a policy can bring to the country, and what are the barriers that we still need to unlock and generate even higher demand for sustainable agricultural products? Good morning, Leisa. I'd like to say good morning to everyone, hoping for a successful conversation amongst us today. Also like to say hello to Paulo, to Milton. Okay, Paulo, Milton, and Leisa. Yes, there's only three of you. So first of all, Leisa, we need to keep in mind that the path to be followed by agribusiness throughout the world is the sustainable path. And we all know that the farmer, they need to produce and they need to conserve. There's no way that we can separate agriculture from environmental issues anymore. That need to be taken into consideration together with social and economic aspects. Us, farmers, wherever we are, we have the obligation of producing safe food, which is what the population expects from us. So we need safe food for our consumer as well as our environment, because, at the end of the day, we depend on the environment to conduct, carry out our livelihood activity, and thus really have benefits in implementing green financing policies, because these policies provide us with the opportunity of attracting more financing sources for agribusiness, and at the same time reinforces our environmental credentials. It is also important to point out that we have the ABC plan and the recently launched Fiagro mentioned by you, in addition to many other credit lines at the scope of the annual harvest plan, particularly this year, where we strengthened the credit lines for sustainable financing, which represents support to low carbon agriculture and other sustainable practices. A recent survey done by our Secretariat of Agricultural Policy here at the Ministry pointed out that only in the harvest 1920, around 25 billion Brazilian reais were contracted for investments in sustainably developed agriculture. It is also very important to remember that green policies, they work because they are lucrative, they are profitable, because if you improve your efficiency, you make more money, and thus farmers will adopt more sustainable policies and practices ever more. In Brazil, in addition to having around 66% of our native biomes preserved, we also have the privilege of having agricultural activity that allows for these biomes that have been degraded to be recovered. And then today, we can see that agriculture is definitely moving forward in these biomes where we have had a lot of degradation, particularly through pasturelands. In other words, we are able to increase our agricultural activity without the need of converting new areas for such activity. And this is a very important credential to attract green investments. Another reason why Brazilian agriculture will be an essential role for us to face the challenge of feeding the local population in Brazil and also the world population from our sustainable production. And along these lines, I like to emphasize that Brazil is ready to provide big-scale environmental services through the conservation of our native biomes. We have over 500 million hectares working to structure the financial markets, capital markets, so that we can drive the rendering of these essential services. We have all the technological, legal, financial structure to ensure and enable that the resources from investments can be allocated regardless of where they are. We can ensure that the proceeds will be used in these safe environmental services. Very close to publishing an executive order that will regulate the CPR, which is our main financial instrument for agricultural financing. And since the agribusiness draft bill that was approved in the National Congress in 2020, they can be used for funding of environmental services rendering through the preservation of our native biomes. In a very recent, near future, we will continue to work in order to offer an ever-increasing range of opportunities for financing and resources for sustainable activity connected to Brazilian Agri. And we are very certain that this segment will increase. Thank you, Madam Minister. And you mentioned the issue of profitability, the opportunities, particularly in relation to degraded pasture lands. We know that the crop, livestock, forest integration is a very important technology in Brazil. And with this, I'd like to give the floor to Paulo, who, we always talk about these environmental benefits that you mentioned in relation to conservation, but it is also eligible for the issuance of green bonds, right, Paulo? So we know that this is very important for these systems in Brazil. And then Paulo, you established the agricultural financial facility that attempts to make these benefits available for the producers. And I'd like you to tell us a little bit, as far as these investments, what do they consist of for us to be able to implement this in different properties? How can they have access to this type of financing and other sustainable investment instruments in order for them to apply in these sort of integrated system activities? Okay? I think you're still on mute, Paulo. Good morning, Leisa. Good morning, everyone watching this. Madam Minister, Teresa, Cristina, it is a pleasure to share this panel with you this Wednesday after a very sort of busy 7th of September. Last year was Brazil's Independence Day in Milton. So this issue of the ILPF, which is Produce, Preserve, and Prosper, okay, it goes much beyond an issue of government. This is an issue of state. As the minister herself mentioned, we have the responsibility of not just feeding the Brazilian population, but also of being the big food supplier to the world. The world population is growing. It is Brazil that is going to supply for this, but this needs to be done within correct social environmental criteria. And along these lines, 10 years ago, we developed what we refer to the ILPF networks. So these are companies, because this is an issue of state. Okay, this goes beyond administrations. And here we're talking about private companies that have joined voluntarily, supporting Embrapa in order to work to disseminate this technology. This is not new technology, okay? The crop, livestock, forest integration technology is something which is used in Brazil for decades, particularly in small properties that needs to do integration in order to survive. But in a structured and organized manner, it is also, general knowledge of everyone. In these 10 years, Leisa, I have to say that I have to acknowledge that we've gone from 2 million integrated hectares to the last figure that we've got, which is around 17 million hectares that works with this sort of integrated way, with grain and cattle, or cattle within the forest, or in the full way, which is the grain, the cattle, and the forest, which is the full integration system. And this is a great step forward. This is very specific to Brazil, because this is only possible to be done in tropical countries. You can't do that in temperate or cold weather regions. And this is a big point where we have moved forward that we can show to the world, led by our technology company called Embrapa and Leisa. We now have the goal of doubling this figure. So the goal is to support the dissemination of this technology more intensely by 2030 for us to reach 30 million hectares using this integration system. And the big slogan that is going to allow us for this great expansion is the issue that you have brought to us, about the financing. In other words, we are going to raise funds from international funds in order to accelerate the investment process in capital, as well as in labor, and particularly for cash flow, to be able to increase this system. The system works. It is highly viable, and above all aspects, environmental aspects, economic aspects, social aspects, I have yet to see a negative point until today in the crop, livestock, forest integration system. However, I do need to draw our attention to the system's complexity. It's not easy a system to operate. I see that the minister is nodding at me because this is a process that I could call, non-stop agriculture, because you plant, you harvest, then you have the cattle, and then you have the forest. You need to vaccinate the animal. So it's different markets, different periods, and it is an intense cash flow throughout the year, and particularly the labor which is used in this system is labor that needs to be much more qualified because they're multitasking. So we have the SAF, and we are now working with the British Agency for commercializing carbon credit. This is the big opportunity for us to expand and accelerate this system in Brazil so that when we get to 2030, we can have 35 million hectares using the integrated system. Oh, great, Paulo. This figure is impressive. I think the 17 is already a milestone in relation to what Brazil has been doing in relation to implementing the system. And as you mentioned, this investment part is very important. So I'd like to bring Milton. He is a great pioneer in the issuing of green bonds. So these were the first green bonds in agricultural sector were done by the cellulose companies, but we have been seeing this diversification with new players joining the game, if you will, without taking into consideration this potential of ILPF. So in addition to this criteria, we have all this sort of agri kind of issues as well as bioenergy, okay? Where does this demand for green bonds come, Paulo? Which are the sectors that you see that are hungry for new emissions, and how can we work more with this sort of financing structure, which is so important for Brazilian structure? Before anything else, good morning, Leisa. Good morning, Minister Teresa Cristina. It's a pleasure being here with you, Madam. And good morning, Paulo, and all of you watching us today. I think that we can start this conversation talking a little bit about this track record that we were talking about, because the first green bonds for the agri sector, they were issued less than 5 years ago, and they were pretty exclusively from the forest sector, paper and cellulose. The first issuances came from this sector. So we need to remember that the lack of knowledge is one of the main deadlocks for us to make green bonds be more comprehensive within the Brazilian agri sector. And this lack of knowledge is something which is being unlocked using, the taxonomies, the standards, and pioneering operations when they start being used in the market, bringing a little bit of the use of this theme. So if we look at the recent history, in 2019, we had the first certification of an ethanol plant here in Brazil for it to be certified in bioenergy, which was the year when the taxonomy for bioenergy was published in 2020. And then today, just for us to have an idea, we have already 8 operations of 1.5 billion reais in green labeled operations in the bioenergy sector. And it is important to remember that this is a sector that has governance and structure that were set up decades ago that allows us to imagine that most of the sector could effectively benefit from this labeling. You have the Renova Bio, the Bon Sucro. So we have this whole structure and installed framework in this sector that allows it to be a natural candidate for green certification of its bonds. More recently, 2020, we released the agricultural taxonomy. The first operation to be done was the Rhizome operation. They are the biggest organic grain producer in the Americas. They issued the first bond, and this was really interesting because they threw a different light to what can or cannot be certified within this agricultural sector, and actually more recent livestock, animal protein. So once more, less than a year, we have, 7 operations that have issued green bonds in this sector with over 1 billion reais in operations that, are labeled or certified operations. When we look at your question about the sub-segments, we can see the agribusiness is ready, the Brazilian agribusiness is very much ready, effectively, many different sectors to get to the issuing of green bonds. So in the grain sector, many producers are certified RPRS, BCI, so they have, ESG criteria meeting the Brazilian forest code, which is incredibly rigid and restrictive. So we do not believe, basically, that there is a technical barrier for this to increase quickly. Other sectors, they are also ready. The livestock sector is already, they have zero deforestation, they have the traceability of their animals, the tracking systems. We have many other sectors where agribusiness is investing. They're investing very much in photovoltaic power, which is also an area that has a need for a lot of investments and also has the possibility of green certification for the bonds issued in relation to that. So we have many different subsectors, as you yourself mentioned, where we have this possibility where the integrated actions of all the market brokers, agents, investors, regulators, issuers, and only through this integrated action are we going to arrive in this ideal world. And then in Minister Teresa Cristina, I believe that we have one of the biggest champions. She has been relentless in working to develop this whole sort of green finance mechanics. And then just to bring my first comment to a close, today, in 2021, 20% of all the CRAs, which are the bonds that are being issued in Ecoagro, they have been labeled or certified as green, which is happening on its own. This is something that really fills us with pride. And then this is, if we're looking at the pipeline for the operations and the structuring, this percentage is actually higher. So I think that we are on the right path. The Brazilian agribusiness is ready to benefit from this boom, and this boom is actually already happening. Thank you, Milton. I know that the minister has another appointment, so before she needs to leave us, I think, Milton, you mentioned all the efforts which the government has been doing, and I believe, Madam Minister, during the pandemic, Brazil has managed to get through, the problems related to any kind of food supply or the financing restrictions for the sector. And then we have Law 3686 from 2020, which is the Agro law, which has also enabled the financing in the capital market for these activities. And then looking forward, what would be the next actions, the next steps that need to be taken in order for us to strengthen the sustainable financing agenda, and also with the development and investors here in the domestic level as well as international, for us to be able to invest and of course reinforce sustainable agriculture in Brazil. And then talking a little bit about what Paulo mentioned in here, I'm very happy to see what Milton has done, the pipeline that we've got, some other businesses that are backed by green bonds. Okay, so Paulo, 35 million hectares, which is our equivalent for the integrated system, is as big as a Germany. So people sometimes don't understand the sizes that we have in Brazil. This is fantastic. This is a very bold target to be reached also. And then answering the second question, well, first of all, we need to be very pragmatic and very rational, which means working based on science. And I've always been saying this. I was very happy actually this year when in May I went to Yuan, where we had the launch of Embrapa's action this year, because Embrapa operates with agriculture based on science or science-based edgy. I joked with him, and Mbapa said that it has to be agriculture and livestock based on science, but we have had support from NGOs such as CBIs, for example, and they provide valuable services in this market, which is growing ever more. And we have the, famous green bonds index. In addition, we have Embrapa that is worldly renowned because of its technological and scientific excellence, and who have provided us with very valuable contribution for defining the necessary protocols for the issuance of green bonds. So this emphasis, science is the first step for us to fight a topic which really concerns us, which is the greenwashing, which is a practice that we do not agree with and that we fight against at all costs, because without security for the consumer and for the investors, it will not be possible for us to build a market that we really do want for our agriculture, that uses all of the sustainability potential that we can offer and provides the world the food security, but at the same time, environmental sustainability. We also have the challenge of offering producers effective ways of ensuring that they can comply with the country's environmental legislation, because as Milton himself mentioned, we have a very rigorous forest code, and we need to show this to the investors. This is something that we need to show to investors. We need to show to the consumer markets also compliance, transparency, rendering of accounts. These are essential elements for good governance, and we need to ensure this. We have had some successes in our efforts to implement the CRA, which is our rural registry, rural environmental registry. The registration is done by the producers. And through these processes, we have established the basis to ensure environmental regularity and offer environmental preservation within private property. It is important to mention that we are indeed going to face other challenges along the way. However, what's most important, as far as I can see, is for us to keep the trajectory that we have privileged and favored since the administration of President Bolsonaro, which is to put the agri business in Brazil in the sustainable path with legal certainty, attracting growing investment volumes in green finances. And then in this environment of global sustainability, we will all need to act with a lot of efforts and rationality in order for us to reach the wished for wishes, economic growth, social inclusion, sustainable development. Thus, we have the continuous support with cutting-edge institutions such as CBI in order for us to continue to lead the vanguard and the cutting-edge levels of where we work. And I'd like to say, invest in Brazilian agri business. It's good for the environment, it's good for your health, and it's good for your wallet. So I'd like to wish you all a very successful end of session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for finding the time to talk a little bit about what the government has been doing and the importance of the market for agribusiness finance here in Brazil, or sustainable finance and sustainable agribusiness finance in Brazil. I know that you have other commitments in your diary for today, but we'll continue in this session with Paulo and Milton. And Milton, I will ask one of my colleagues to be here with you and to respond to any questions that you may have. He'll be representing the ministry on my behalf while I'm away. Thank you very much, Leisa. Thank you, Paulo. Thank you, Milton. I'm sure you're going to have an excellent session in continuation of this. Thank you. I think the minister has mentioned a number of important topics related to investment, and resonating a little bit what Milton said with regards to what agribusiness has been doing. And with regard to the labels in more recent operations, I think we can see, Milton, if we understand the structure of these receivable certificates for agribusiness in Brazil, how it's growing in Brazil. My question is, how can we translate that for our international investors? So we're talking specifically about the issuance of these offshore CRAs or these certificates. Well, Leisa, just to mention a little bit, or to talk a little bit about our experience in Brazil. We have reached 80 billion Brazilian reais in less than a decade. So this issuance is huge, and it proves that it's very adequate, and it offers investors the level of security that investors seek. So it's a public offer, and it's controlled by our Securities Commission, and it is supported by a wide regulatory framework that has enabled it to become one of the most sought after bonds in the market. What we can say here, in terms of our expectations for the near future, is related to the recent agribusiness law that was published by the government last year, which enabled the issuance of these certificates in foreign currency and the issuance of these CRAs overseas, and that these can be distributed to international investors. This new law enables something that had been a demand in the market for a long time, because Brazilian agribusiness, many of these value chains are denominated in foreign currency. If you think about soybeans and coffee and cotton, a number of these chains have their price and their costs set in US dollars. So effectively, if we do not take that reality into account, this would generate a higher level of insecurity to producers and to farmers themselves. And a number of institutions have already been doing that, and they're based on these natural credit that exists in these chains. And this new agribusiness law has enabled us to build on our experience in securitizing these CRAs in Brazil, and has enabled us to share this experience and this value with international investors. We are preparing a new operation that will be launched in the next couple of months. We are going to launch a new pilot CRA in US dollars, and this will be launched in a European stock market, and we expect to effectively unlock all the necessary operating arrangements for this to happen. There are a number of points and topics that we still have to address with regard to other countries' legislations. So we're still undergoing this process of learning and developing this financial instrument, but we expect to reach the end of this in less than 2 months, and this will enable foreign investors to invest and to take part in all the benefits provided by Brazilian agribusiness with no added legal risks, because it is a very strong type of bond and has proven this in the Brazilian context. And if we consider this possibility of issuing these bonds overseas, and this possibility of securitization overseas with a number of investors under the same umbrella, and if we bring this together with our previous discussion on our ESG agenda and a green finance agenda, which actually Brazil has a lot to present on this and to offer on this in this area, I am sure that we'll be able to access this green finance market overseas, which is a lot more developed than such market in Brazil, and we'll be able to attract these investors, and therefore benefit this sector in Brazil, which effectively this could change the way that people see financing or green financing in Brazil. We're very excited about this opportunity, which will open a new avenue, a new path ahead of us, and we have a lot to celebrate. Thank you very much, Milton. And just touching on a question that has been sent to us by the audience, let me introduce Angelo, who is the Deputy Secretary for Agricultural Policy at the Brazilian Agriculture Ministry. Milton has talked about about agribusiness and the CRAs, and the minister has talked about it too. And what should Brazilian investors do to engage with international investors? Okay, I think it's still muted. Okay, so the government has strived to engage Brazilian investors in this work that has culminated in this meeting here. We signed an MOU with CBI, and we're working together with other entities that promote green finance. And we're doing this based on science, based on rational knowledge and arguments. And we are about to start holding workshops with investors. And we had a plan, but that had to be stopped because of the pandemic, because we had planned a number of trips and face-to-face events. And our expectation is to show international investors, in addition to domestic investors, show the alternatives and the options they have for investment. We have a financial market that needs to be improved, and this is very important for agribusiness in Brazil. And we are 100% pro-market. We want to facilitate the business environment, and we need to continue facilitating transactions in foreign currency in our country, in the domestic environment. And we haven't completed everything that we wanted to do in the first round of actions, which, as you said, ended with the promulgation or with the issuance of the agribusiness law. And we want to work together with farmers, with local farmers, to develop sustainable policies and certification on a scientific basis. As you mentioned, building on the work developed by Embrapa. And this is what we're doing. We're working on all fronts, 360 degrees, working with investors and producers and certifiers, and also working together with those that are responsible for structuring these operations. We're working together to speed up this process and launch stronger green finances and develop this market in Brazil. Thank you very much, Angelo. And I think this leads us to another question. And I'd like to invite Paulo to say a few words, but it seems that he has disappeared from my screen for a minute. But I think when we talk about science-based initiatives, I think the minister had also mentioned this a short while ago. And we know, Paulo, that the agricultural criteria are also science-based, talking about the CBI criteria. And I understand that the Brazilian legislation, supports this type of work. And I'd like to ask you how you calculate this, from the point of view of ILPF. I'd like to know, therefore, from you, ask you from a more technical perspective how it actually happens in practice. Well, we are still defining, we're still in the process of agreeing the protocols. So it's a very wide topic, and we're talking about a very big country with different situations. So as the minister said, Brazilian agriculture is science-based. So just to give you an idea, we have an area in the Brazilian Cerrado. We after 4 or 5 years of our activity, we have scientific data that we know that we can convert a huge volume of CO2 per hectare comparing to international standards. So, and we have data that say that 1.5 ton of CO2 equivalent might be the result of that. So depending on the practice and the region, we'll be able to quantify carbon sequestration and retention and carbon storage in the soil. Embrapa has this methodology, and the ILPF network has developed certification or a type of certification that generates a score, and we assess over 100 different items in each agricultural unit or property that includes environment and science and production, etc. And basically, we create an environmental indicator or an ESG indicator for each property or each farm. And based on these indicators, foreign investors and the foreign market, they have been provided resources and funds based on these indicators. So this is a process that is based, that's still ongoing. We have already developed the methodology for certification. We have already achieved a score, and we have one farm in this region, in the center of Brazil, that has already been certified, but we are still developing this process so that we can reach, let's say, a wider acceptance, a wider practice in the market. And we have been approached by 2 companies in the UK with a different proposal that would simply try to trade these carbon markets. That would be the main focus. And as we know, the EU has sped up the targets for achieving net zero. And it's very difficult for some companies and for some industries or some financial centers to reach these targets in the deadlines proposed or in the timeframes proposed by the EU. So there's a lot of international interest from all over the world by companies who want to purchase these credits. And we are developing a pilot project in this regard, and we are talking about a very simple deal. At the moment, every ton of carbon costs between 80 and 90 Brazilian reais, and it's a simple transaction. So how many hectares are you talking about, and for how long? And then based on science, based on the data that we have available, this can give you an indication of a carbon stock of that many tons over that period of time, and based on the agreed rates that will be transformed in a price, and the transaction can take place. So but as Milton said, some companies and some sectors have been working in, let's say, in this trade aspects for a while, such as the forestry sector, and Renova Bio started doing that as well. They started last year, and they're doubling their prospects for commercialization in the near future. But when we talk about agribusiness, when we talk about grains and soybeans and cattle, there's still a number of initiatives to try to implement these processes and to agree these protocols, etc. So we are working still on defining the protocols, but commercialization itself is still incipient. So this will be actually a big step forward for agribusiness in Brazil in the near future. Well, that's excellent, Paulo. We have been hearing a lot about this, about the carbon market. And I always say that green financing can fund this technology that will generate this credit. So the market is all related. I mean, the whole market is correlated. Now, talking a little bit about agriculture and cattle ranching, Milton has also talked about this. We haven't seen many bonds in the specific sector related to cattle farming. So what could we say to investors and producers in this area? So, Milton, what can you say about greenwashing? So, how can investors be sure that they are investing in sustainable cattle farming and sustainable livestock farming? Well, I would say that the livestock sector faces, let's say, a huge challenge with regards to green financing. Effectively, it is a sector that is often accused of having a major influence on deforestation. So, deforestation or the absence of deforestation is perhaps the major policy that has to be faced and addressed by those that are involved in this chain. And the issue of traceability becomes particularly important so that we can actually prove that that livestock was raised in zero deforestation areas or areas that have prevented deforestation. And these are the type of operations that are being developed at the moment. The major challenge at the moment is still to fund and to support the funding of these initiatives so that we can actually ensure at some point that that beef or that meat in general has not been involved in any type of deforestation. That would be a major step forward for this chain. Basically, all major players have developed significant initiatives and very advanced initiatives in this regard. We have seen green bond operations already in the market that are already based on this strategy and follow this line. And I think we're about to see more and more interest and more issuances with this green finance approach in the livestock sector. Well, thank you. That's excellent. I have another question here to Paulo. We have also talked about the role of Brazil as a food supplier for the whole world. And I'd like to know how this new law could impact this productivity. Now, sorry, how could ILPF influence that? Now, actually, ILPF is actually it's an international proof of what we have been doing here in terms of agriculture. Whereas in let's say the northern hemisphere, you can produce one or two type of crops, or perhaps you can have one or two harvests per year because of the winter. Here in Brazil or in our region, we have the technical and the scientific ability to produce 12 months per year. And that is why this technology is so important, because you can then reduce the pressure towards expanding towards other areas. For example, if you have a farm where traditionally, through traditional methods, you would collect perhaps 2 or 3 tons per hectare. Now, through these techniques, ILPF technique, you would be able to increase this productivity a lot more. And this will reduce the pressure on some areas. Also, reduce the pressure to expand to new areas, and would also increase productivity in those areas that are already producing. Now, Brazil produces grains in over 70 million hectares, and we expect over the next 10 years to increase this production and reach 100 million hectares. So that means we'll expand to another 30 million hectares. And these 30 million hectares, we could take that from the area that's being used currently for livestock farming, because livestock farming in Brazil currently occupies 210 million hectares. So we can improve these occupancy per hectare of our cattle by improving the technology in our pastures, in our pasture lands, and convert part of this area that is currently used by extensive pastures to produce grains. And this is a system would find a balance between farming and livestock production, and we could actually increase our production area simply by managing better our system. And there's no reason that we should fear the expansion of agribusiness in Brazil, provided that is done based on rational, technical, and scientific basis, and based on responsibility. And this is what most farmers want to do. And most farmers in Brazil know very well, as our minister has said, Brazilian agriculture has an extractive approach. So we extract resources from nature, and all farmers know that if they extract too much from nature, they'll end up with nothing. And this is a major advantage of us that we have here in Brazil. And this system will increase the resilience of Brazilian farmers. And we had in the past a significantly positive, let's say, soybean harvest, but we lost this year much of our harvest because of the drought. But of course, this sort of loss that we experienced recently was somehow absorbed by farmers because they had a very positive harvest just before that. So this type of resilience will improve our sector because our farmers will have more access to credit, will be better qualified, will have access to investment and to a number of other scientific solutions. And this will require ever lower costs from our Brazilian farmers. That's excellent. And Paulo, talking a little bit about resilience and about the impact that we can see of climate change on agriculture. And Angelo, I would like you to talk about a little bit about this rural insurance and what the government can do and how this can help prevent and address these impacts. Well, that's a very good point, Leisa. We cannot dissociate an efficient credit market. You cannot dissociate it from good mitigation of credits. And in agriculture, we're talking about rural insurance. And this is a major gap in the market in Brazil. And this has to be a very direct and incisive measure taken by the state in Brazil. And this is what happens everywhere in Brazil. This type of insurance is very expensive for us to develop, and we need the support of the government to develop that. So we need to improve our policy. We have two different policies in Brazil. One of them is Proagro, and the other policy as well, neither of them is available to find a solution. So we are aware of that, and we are managing this and discussing it with other ministries and with central government to develop proper policies so that this type of rural insurance can actually play the role that we expect from it, which is to mitigate risks and foster the credit market. And all these topics are interrelated, but we are considering, we're trying to take a step back and have a general view of the whole system. And as I said, we are trying to work together with other partners here in central government and to launch it as soon as possible. Well, thank you very much, Angelo. And I'd like to finalize with a more open question to all members of the panel. And we've been talking a lot about transition bonds. So I'd like to ask you about the opportunities for Brazilian agribusiness. I've already talked about livestock farming and the possibility of cooperation. I'd like to hear from you how you see these transition with regards to Brazilian agribusiness. We know that it's sustainable, but what are the opportunities for investors and issuers that are watching us? May I start? Okay. I am an optimist, Leisa. I see the Brazilian agribusiness. If you consider all the progress that we've had over the past 40 years, it wasn't. We didn't achieve that by chance, or just because nature was favorable to us. It was all science-based, and it was all headed and led by Embrapa. There was no tropical farming technology anywhere else in the world. We developed it here in Brazil with our researchers, with our people. We have grown a lot, and the best news that I can share with you, or the best piece of news, is that we can actually double our grain production over the next 10 years. And we have an estimated production of 500 million tons of grains, and we can actually increase our livestock herd in the near future. And all that within a balanced system based on the 3 Ps: production, preservation, and prosperity. And without prosperity, this would all be a dream, just a romantic dream. So our farmers, they are highly committed with the environment. What we read, let's say, in the press, and what we hear on the media about destroying the forest and burning the forest, this is not done by our farmers. Our farmers are extremely concerned about this, and I know that for sure, because my family, they're all farmers. My father was a farmer, and every time that we cut a tree in our property, we had to plant another 5 trees to replace that one that was cut. That was a rule at home. And this is because our farmers are aware of the importance of protecting the environment. And the vast majority of Brazilian farmers are highly aware of that. And if we fly over a number of different countries around the world, the US, Germany, anywhere in Europe, you will see that there's a lot less area in terms of protected areas and preserved areas in other countries than in Brazil. We shouldn't be ashamed of anything. We are highly committed with the environment and protecting the forest. And our forest code actually is very rigid. And green finance is now reaching Brazil, will be able to finance our expansion. And we want our agriculture to be a market agriculture, a market business. We shouldn't rely on the government. Our practices should be recognized and compensated by the market. In particular, if we consider the European market that has such aggressive targets in terms of zero carbon, and they will need the Brazilian ILPF system so that they can reach their targets. Well, thank you, Paulo. I saw that Angelo is about to say something, but if Milton wants to say something, he can go ahead. But I know Milton very well. He prefers to hear first and then say his words. So both Paulo and you, Leisa, have touched 2 very important points. The first one is we need transition. This is we have to recognize that investors around the world want sustainable agriculture. So it would be actually harmful to the environment if we exclude those that were not 100% green at the moment. But we have to consider sustainability and transition at the same time. The issue of sustainability is part of the lives of our farmers. And when we talk about agriculture, I'm talking about planting, crops, and also livestock farming. So when we talk about ESG, we have actually 3 letters: environment, sustainable, or social, and governance. So we need support. Our farmers need more support to improve their governance. And this is a flaw in the market. Sometimes it's very difficult for farmers in the country to improve their governance without any support. And I'm not talking about the government necessarily. I'm talking about support from the financial market as well. We want to create this sustainable markets for agribusiness so that we can provide these farmers with the right conditions so that they can change their, let's say, their traditional agriculture into something more technological. So, I mean, almost all Brazilian farmers, they practice a type of agriculture that generates positive externalities to the Brazilian environment. But this can be improved, this can be maximized. And how can that be done? That can be done, and the goal, of course, is to produce food to meet global demand. And I'm talking about, countries around the world, countries in Asia and in Africa, they're all eating better and more, and their food safety or their food security, pardon me, is linked to Brazil's ability to produce more, and therefore we have this growing demand. We have this responsibility to meet this demand, as Paulo said earlier, and Paulo also said, as we said before, that tropical agriculture and our environment in Brazil is the best environment to meet such demand. But we need to make this shift towards increasing and improving our sustainability. And I'd like to end by saying this. I'm not talking about offering a compensation for, I'm not saying that those that are already fully sustainable should not be compensated. Of course, they should be compensated. But at the moment, transition is just as important. And this is the message I'd like to leave to our investors. Thank you very much. Well, thank you. Milton, your last words. I think I can only agree to everything that's being said. I think the transition bonds will be particularly important to support those that need to change their practices to reach fully sustainable practices. And I think this is what all farmers in Brazil and all producers in Brazil desire. But I think we are going through a time when we're still trying to, let's say, expand and prove the value of these green bonds. So there's a number of producers, there's a large chunk of the market that are already eligible and ready to issue green bonds. And we haven't yet reached everyone. So first of all, we need to unlock this potential for green bonds. And we're already doing that. We're already unlocking this potential in Brazilian agribusiness. And once we have done that, then we should focus more on transition. I think this is an optimistic view that I'd like to share with everyone. So we need to consider these two words. We have a group of people that are already ready for it, and they need to invest more in technology and ESG. And also those producers, they also need, let's say, responsible investment. By bringing together these two worlds, this will generate benefits not only to Brazil, but to the whole world with food security and everything that we want in this new market. Well, thank you very much, Milton. Milton, Angelo, Paulo, thank you very much for joining this discussion with us. There are a number of questions that are being still asked, and I think we need to continue communicating and talking about what's been done, about the opportunities, and about what has been done, but what still needs to be done, and the path ahead of us. And there's still a lot to happen in Brazil, and many positive stories that have already reached us and reached the market. And we're a bit late already. We went 4 minutes over our time, but I'd like to thank you because the goal of this event is actually to talk about the opportunities and about everything that's been happening in Brazil and about how to unlock this potential in Brazil. And our conference will continue until Friday this week with other aspects and other discussions on the sustainable market. I'd like to thank you very much to all three panelists and to all participants who have been with us until now. Thank you very much.